Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. No matter where you are in this fine land of ours, I want you to know how pleased I am that you have taken time out of your schedule to join us today. It's another episode in our non-profit Hot Topics series. I'm Daryl Prale. I'll be your host today. And today we're talking about keeping control in a tech-savvy world. Is this something you can all relate to? Because I know I can. There's a little bit of irony. We're sitting here with a webinar to talk about being tech savvy. We got some experts here with us today. You're going to meet them shortly. But before we do that, just in case this is your first webinar with us, I want to take an opportunity to explain to you how the process works. Basically, it's really simple. Everybody who's attending right now is in listen-only mode, all right? So we can't hear you. If there's noise going on in your background, don't worry about it. You're cool. It's all honky-dory. But with that said, even though we can't hear you, we do want to hear it from you. So to do that, what we are going to do is say, hop on a chat window, whether you're on a Windows or a Mac or a tablet, you'll see it. It's called questions. So even if you don't have a question, you just have a comment, an anecdote, a story you want to share, type it in there and we will physically get it. When you send us your questions or your comments, then we'll save them up. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to enter into a Q&A session with our experts. And that's when we'll actually ask your questions. So whether you ask a question 2 minutes in or 25 minutes in, it will get asked, but at the end. Similarly, if you don't want to use this because you're a social media rock star, let me tell you what we're doing here. We actually live tweet all the brilliant comments that our panelists make. And you can track that if you use the hashtag #WelshNPO. All right? And you'll get all the sound bites that way. Similarly, you can send us questions if you send your question in and you use #WelshNPO. So that's the way it works. Your questions get asked that way. All right, moving on. I did promise you we're going to have some experts, and they are right here. Our host and moderator is Krista Casey. With over 20 years of experience, Krista has become an expert in auditing not-for-profit organizations. In January 2010, Krista was appointed as Welsh's Director, Not-for-Profit Sector. Prior to this, Krista was a Quality Assurance Manager. Her previous and current positions require a high level of technical competence while staying informed of all developments in accounting and auditing standards. And if you've listened to any of our NPO webinars, you've heard Krista before. Krista, welcome back.
Hi, Daryl.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right. That's Krista. And Krista's joining us today in our Ottawa office. But as we are a broad, big, powerful organization, we have offices everywhere. And today we're joined by two complementary experts, Kathy in Virginia, out of our Toronto office. Let's meet Kathy. She has led Welsh's Toronto office as partner since joining the firm in 2011. She has 30 years of financial statement audit and accounting experience. Apart from developing her experience in auditing with NPOs and for-profit clients, Kathy has also managed as Director of Finance the startup and ongoing operations of 8 companies. Among her community involvement, Kathy is on the board of directors of the Canadian Society of Association Executives Trillium Chapter and the co-chair of the SAE Governance Committee. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Daryl. It's great to be here.
All right. And Kathy's a repeat performer too. So she's had some great comments in the past in the webinars. Check her out. Last but definitely not least, Virginia Lackey. She joined Welsh in 2006 after completing her Bachelor of Commerce degree. She received her Chartered Accountant designation in 2009 and her Certified Internal Auditor designation in 2010. Virginia is the Director of Assurance Services at Welsh Toronto. She specializes in audit engagements in a variety of NPO sectors and the public sector. Virginia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Daryl.
Now, I should tell you, if you can't tell by that response from Virginia, this is her first webinar and she's nervous. So we all promised to pick on her today and help her overcome her fear. So by all means, send us, tweets, send us comments, maybe words of encouragement for Virginia, but we know that she's a rock star and she's going to do well. With that, Krista, I'm done. I'm going to pass the reins over to you. You have control. This is your show. So what are we talking about today?
Thanks, Daryl. So today we're definitely living in the information age, and that is driven by so many significant advancements in technology. There was a time when I used to consider myself to be pretty tech savvy, but honestly, now I'm not so sure. I definitely need help from time to time in keeping up. Organizations have also made big leaps in technology, even within their own finance department. And I'm not even talking about from going from manual ledgers to QuickBooks. But how do organizations keep up with the pace of this change without losing control over this information? Or even maintain some of the tried and true internal controls that have served them so well over the years? Today, we're going to talk about some of these big technological advancements. In particular, we'll be focusing on technology shifts and how banking is done and managing the payroll function. It also seems that everyone is trying to go paperless and wants to be on the cloud, so we're definitely going to talk about that too. As Daryl mentioned, we'll also leave some time for your questions. Now, Kathy, I know the way I do my own personal banking is not the same as how my parents do their own personal banking. Besides taking physical cash out of the ATM, I do all of my banking on an app on my smartphone, and last week I even deposited my first check by only taking a picture of it. Can you tell us, Kathy, what some of the common trends you see in banking?
Okay, so yeah, in the corporate setting, the same thing is happening, and I think that more and more we're not going to the bank, the actual bank branch. We're doing things in our office or through our smartphones. Anyway, I mean, I guess the key features are online bank access, which I think everyone's had that for a while, where they can go in and see the activity in their accounts and if they have any issues. So that's a pretty sort of an older technique. And then I guess the other thing that's trending is significantly is making electronic payments through your bank rather than checks. And these are sometimes called EFTs or electronic fund transfers, or some banks call them ACHs. Also, so once you take away the check signers, you have to develop procedures for remote approval. And check signers now will carry a fob where they will go once a payment has been set up, they will go online and approve it electronically. And I guess one of the newer things is check scanners, where rather than making a bank deposit, you will have a check scanner in your office, and once checks come in by mail, you'll actually scan them into the bank, directly into your bank. And then you'll get a report from the bank electronically, obviously, showing the scanned check and everything like that. And basically, the message after you've scanned your check, you can just throw it out. So, which is a bit scary, but that's where we're going. I guess the other sort of neat thing is that with the online, you can give other users read-only access, which allows, say, your accountant or say someone, your bookkeeper or whatever, to get online and not make any changes to the bank.
I guess that's probably a good idea.
More and more, what?
I said, I guess the read-only access is probably a good idea so that everybody can keep an eye on that bank account.
Exactly. But also, if you, which a lot of people have a remote or bookkeeper, or, an external, and so they can just, rather than sending bank statements all the time, the bookkeeper can go online and just get the activity on an ongoing basis. And so that also helps even when you're managing, doing cash flow, weekly cash flow reports. You can go in and see what's gone through, and, which is, great benefit. And then finally, I mean, getting big stacks of bank statements in the mail is becoming a thing of the past. More and more, we were getting our bank statements online, and you can see all the scanned checks and at the end of the month, which is great.
Yeah, because that's even a significant advancement from just even when the days when you used to get your paper copy of your bank statement and then the big stack of all the checks that went through. But then they started showing the scan copy in the back. But now you're saying you can actually look at that online too?
Exactly, and you couldn't close off your month end until, I remember, it usually comes by the 15th of the month, the bank statement I'm talking about. Now it's like you can basically close your month end by the first day of the month if you are anxious enough.
Great. Well, that's very different from how we've seen organizations do banking in the past. Can you tell us why some organizations might want to use some of those features on online banking?
Pardon? Sorry?
Do you want to tell us how some organizations why they might want to use some of these features?
Okay, well, I mean, I think we've touched on a bit of this, but I mean, obviously the constant access to bank activity, and for us, like some of our clients are constantly monitoring cash flow, so that's great in that you can, do like a rolling cash flow on a weekly basis, and it also, it enables accounting, whether external or internal, to keep the books up to date on a timely basis and have month-end reports ready by shortly after the end of the month, like a few days. And I guess the other thing is it's cost efficient. I mean, you're no longer, paying for checks, which I think, now even just to order one check is like $1, and then you have to mail it and print it and process, and then the processing fee. So you've gotten rid of that cost. check signers, I mean, there's a cost to everyone getting together to sign checks, like whether it's traveling by car or whatever. So rather than that, we just they're able to go online wherever they are and approve the payment.
They can even improve it like on some resort in Mexico or something like that.
Well, that's right, exactly. So that is true, and that happens quite a bit. So because you have your board, a lot of the times the checks will be approved by a board member, and who isn't necessarily in your office, and so it enables them to do it wherever they are and whenever.
Yeah,
So,
that sounds like a great idea.
I have to say, I shouldn't say whenever, because once you've set up an EFT, there is a timeline.
Okay.
In a difference between banks where you can only approve it in a certain window each day.
Okay.
So that comes to the bit of a, but once you learn those timelines, everything goes pretty smoothly. I mean, I guess time saving is another thing. I mean, you don't have to go to the bank to deposit your checks. You don't have to get people to sign checks. You're not printing things out and putting them together. And I guess more than anything, it's environmentally friendly. You're reducing your carbon footprint and increasing your control.
Right, for sure. With controls, I know that when you have a manual check and you have a signature on the bottom, a lot of times these people will put these checks in the mail, and they often will use like a window envelope when they do that. And I know even in a couple of instances, I've had some clients in the past year, 2 clients that I can think of, where those checks have been intercepted in the mail, and they were like washed out the payee, and somebody was actually able to forge the payee's name into their own information. And
I've heard about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that definitely. But going this route, you can't do that.
It's a lot harder for someone to intercept that kind of information, I guess, right? Because you're bypassing it totally. Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that all sounds great, but there's got to be some downsides to online banking.
Definitely, and I think we've already. The one thing. It's not like you can start doing it overnight. There is implementation time and training, and you have to keep in mind that not everyone is tech savvy, so there's a learning curve that for people to become comfortable with it. But I find in general, if you do it properly, and the banks are very, very helpful with the training. They'll even come to your office and help you. They like the cash management departments in banks are now very, very comprehensive. So they'll either do a very intensive on or phone training or come to your office. So
so you don't have to go into the bank; they'll actually come to you.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Wow.
So I guess the other really key thing is that you can't forget that you have to make sure that your controls pre-implementation mirror the controls after implementation. So you have to make sure that your check signer, so that's setting up this. If you have 2 check signers with checks, then you have to make sure that you set up a dual approval process through the bank, and that's done through FOBs, as I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So that's a very key thing.
So make sure that you have the same process. So it might be in a different form, but the same type of controls in place when you go electronic.
Exactly. And then I guess always too, maybe somebody's down on the beach somewhere and says, okay, I'm going to, approve it. What if the computer access isn't correct? So it isn't proper, and then you've got a bit of a problem. So that's a bit of a risk, I guess, that you can't get the proper access.
Right, like if you have a shaky Wi-Fi signal or something like that, which might happen if you're remote.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I guess the other thing is, even though the fobs are great, you do have to carry them around, and you could lose them. So you got to. It's a way of, you have to keep them
secure.
safe.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing, the risk too, along with that, is that if you don't control your fob properly and you leave your instructions of signing on, you could get back to the people trying to use it improperly.
Right.
And I guess the other key thing along with this is, people are signing checks remotely. So usually when they sign them, they're signing checks, they're signing transfers remotely. Usually if you have a check, you would present it to the check signers with all the support, like the invoices or whatever other documentation. So you have to figure out a process for sending that information to the check signer, who will be now doing remotely. So what we do with a lot of our clients is, suggest is that they email the actual, then you have to scan it all in and email it to the check signer, and then they will review it and approve it, and the email of approval will be saved electronically just to show that they have actually reviewed the
Right.
report, which in the past, you put those stamps on, reviewed by. So that, again, that's a bit of a learning curve and a bit of a process. But so it's key that you figure out a proper way to store everything. And so the long and short, it's great, but it does take time, and you have to be diligent about making sure that the everything is set up properly.
Definitely. And I think you made a great point, Kathy, when you're talking about making sure that the people who sign the checks actually have access to that supporting documentation, so they're not just blindly giving their approval without actually seeing what indeed that check is paying for.
Yeah, again, that's you have to make sure that your pre-implementation controls mirror your post-implementation.
Yeah, great point. I always tell clients that cash is king and that they need to always maintain strong internal controls in that area, especially surrounding the cash that leaves the bank account, like, check signing type stuff, because we all know that once the cash is gone, it's extremely difficult to ever get back.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. So many of the organizations I work with have payroll that's by far their largest expense. So it makes sense that there have been some technological advances in that area. Virginia, could you tell us what some of these payroll advancements are?
Yeah, definitely. So I've kind of highlighted 4 key areas where I find that technology, whether you're still using an in-house payroll system or using a payroll service provider, there's options to use technology to your benefit. And I think the thing is, my experience with a lot of not-for-profit organizations, as you said, the largest cost is often the payroll. However, the resources allocated to processing that payroll are often quite small. So, you normally have one staff responsible for both the HR and the payroll, and it can be quite overwhelming. So I think anytime we can implement technology, it's great, and it helps create efficiencies. So the areas I've kind of highlighted are employee files, moving them to an electronic format, changes in timesheets and time cards and how those are completed and processed, payroll outputs, meaning kind of pay slips and pay registers, and then the payments and EFTs and doing online payments for payroll,
Great.
as well as invoices, as Kathy had mentioned.
For sure. So I know employee files contain a lot of private and sensitive data. Can you tell us why an organization might want to maintain electronic payroll files?
Right. So I think the thing is with what I've seen actually just coming off of audit season and auditing a lot of not-for-profit organizations is that, employee files were historically maintained in paper copy. And as we're all getting more into an email and a technology-savvy world, those are changing to, some of the documents are now being stored electronically, even if the employee file is not electronic. So I think there's benefits to move to a fully electronic employee file. And those benefits are, one, it saves space. The HR manager or the payroll staff don't need to keep drawers and drawers and cabinets full of employee files from years and years. And some organizations have hundreds of staff, a lot of part-time or seasonal staff. So it saves a lot of space in the office. And then also lower storage costs. So there is a requirement to retain all these employee files and employee documentation. So if you're going to maintain and store paper copies, you obviously have to rent storage facilities or some extra space. So if you have it all electronically, you can save it on the network, and you don't need that extra storage space.
Right.
It's also much more accessible. So
is accessibility a good thing?
It can be, in that, all employees legally have the right to access their employee file at any time. So it's a lot easier just to pull up one electronic file of an employee that's been there for a long time rather than try and find the paper file in the 4th cabinet down the hall. And then also, as various managers or supervisors make salary changes and send approvals, giving certain staff access, those that should have access, to save the documents themselves and put in performance evaluations and all that can help with the filing and making sure the files are more complete. So accessibility can be a positive. And then there's also the reduction in the risk of loss. So, if you have everything saved on the network, which is properly backed up and stored, if there was a fire or water damage at the site, you're not going to lose all those employee files, evaluations, pay details, confidential information, etc.
Right.
It'll still all be in electronic format. And then one thing that's always key to an organization is onboarding your employees. So making sure that right from the start, they understand their duties and responsibilities, the vision and mission of the organization, and all the policies and procedures in place for them. And so having electronic employee files allows online onboarding. So it allows the organization or the HR manager to email all those documents electronically beforehand, have them signed digitally and returned and saved on the network before the employee even gets to work on the first day. But of course, just like with online banking or anything else, there's definitely some risks or challenges with using electronic employee files.
Okay.
And the first one is that although it increases accessibility, that's the problem. You want to make sure that there's restricted access. But just as Kathy was saying with the online banking, it's very important to look at the controls and the measures put in place when you're dealing with the current system and ensuring that it exists in the new system. So using paper employee files, they're always maintained in a locked cabinet in the HR manager's office with restricted access. So if they're going to be put electronically and saved on the network, then it's important that also there's restricted access. So, it's password protected or the documents are encrypted, user restrictions are placed on the specific file folders saved on the network. And the other thing, this isn't necessarily completely related to electronic employee files, but I think the biggest thing about employee files is completeness. So as I've seen recently, there is this change where a lot of salary approvals or notifications of pay increases or job description changes are being done and sent to employees by email.
Right. And
so those emails are often saved by the HR manager or the payroll clerk, but they're never being included in the employee file. They're just stored in that staff email.
Like somebody's inbox?
Correct. And so I think it's key that all documents, whether they're electronic formats or hard copy, are always completely put into the employee file, and the employee file is complete.
For sure.
And so I think that's one other complication too when you come to electronic files is that there's often a lot of these documents now that are produced in electronic format, such as salary approvals from different managers, etc. But there's still a lot of documents that are in hard copy. So if you are going to move to an electronic employee file, then those documents should be scanned in so that they're legible and saved in that employee's file. So there's not a mixture between paper and electronic files. And then there's document retention. So again, there are rules about how long these documents need to be retained for. And so although they're electronic, you still need to make sure that they're saved for the minimum number of years that's required. And then there's data security, just like anything. So as I said, you want to make sure that you have restricted access, that these files are not being saved even by the HR manager or the payroll clerk in multiple locations. So they're not in email, because if they're on email, they could end up on a personal device, which might not be properly locked,
Right.
might not follow the same policies and procedures that the organization has. And then, or they could be moved onto other personal devices like home laptops, etc.
Yeah, that's a great point, Virginia. So you're saying in addition to worrying about who has access to these confidential files, which should be pretty clear, you also need to make sure that there are mechanisms in place for individuals not to be able to just easily copy them onto other mediums and that kind of thing?
Correct. And I think as long as you're working on a network system, those restrictions can be put in place.
Okay.
When you get into cloud computing, it's a little harder to restrict the copying or retrieval of those documents.
Right.
So it has to be policy driven. So that's one thing, is that as you move to electronic employee files or implement any of these new technologies, it's really key that the IT department's involved, and they can help ensure that the policies and procedures are there to make sure that especially this employee confidential information is not disseminated or at risk.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think those are great points, Virginia, because it's such confidential information that we really need to maintain that kind of security around it for sure. So I know that some organizations have employees that are paid hourly, so they need to have some sort of timesheet system in place to be able to properly pay their employees. And some organizations might have staff that are paid on a salary but need to prove to their funders the amount of time the employees have spent working on a particular project. So how have timesheets evolved over time?
Yeah, so it's actually great. I think it's been a change in the last few years. I think this is a fairly new change, or something that people are a little bit more accepting of, or there's less reluctance to move to. But yeah, as you said, in not-for-profits, timesheets are definitely crucial because there are a lot of hourly employees, or there is that reporting to funders.
Right.
And so to have a really strong timesheet or time card system is key. So there's many new ways to do electronic timesheets. So they can be online-based or just kind of network-based. A lot of the payroll service providers like Ceridian, ADP, et cetera, provide add-on features of these electronic timesheets. And then there are some off-the-shelf electronic timesheet systems that can be used and then integrated into an internal payroll system, like if someone's doing payroll through just their QuickBooks or ACPAC system.
Okay.
So I think the number one thing about electronic timesheets is it increases accuracy. I'm sure many of our clients and people doing the payroll can understand that when you're using manual systems, you're relying on legible handwriting, and not everyone is as legible as the next. And so there are a lot of errors that can occur when you can't always read the hours that they put in or understand the dates and the times.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, when you're using manual systems, you're really relying on an honor system. You're really relying on the employee to put in the actual hours that they worked and not the hours they want to be paid for. Whereas with an electronic time system or clock time card system, the employees have to click in and click out, and they can't manipulate the hours.
So is that like on is that like on an app type basis? Like, is that any different from those punch card systems you would have seen back in the day?
So there are some that are app-based. There's some that are biometric-based. So we have one client that uses their fingerprint to log on when they show up to the site. And also another client uses a system that once the employee clocks in and clocks out, they don't see the time that they did that at. So they don't really have control of, looking, okay, yeah, I clocked in at 9 o'clock. It should have been 8 o'clock, so I'll clock out at 6 instead of 5.
Yeah.
So they don't see that time once they've done it. So the makers of these electronic time cards have done their research, and they've eliminated a lot of the risks that exist in the manual time cards. And also, when someone has to add up all the time cards manually in the hours and recalculate the totals, there's always room for human error.
Right.
When you're using electronic time cards, all the hours automatically total, and so there's increased efficiency there, accuracy there. The other thing is they're much more convenient. So I know a lot of not-for-profit organizations have various locations with staff working at all the different locations and the head office at one location. So it's much more convenient for the staff to log on online or on their phone or whatever platform is being used and sign in and then submit their timesheets to the HR or payroll clerk, rather than the HR payroll clerk having to produce these timesheets every pay cycle or whatever the case may be, disseminate them, collect them all back for them to be processed.
For sure. I'm just going to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure that we hit all these points because I want to make sure that we get to the questions that are at the end. So I know that you've talked about the supervisor being able to approve the timesheets, which is really important when it comes to, maintaining controls. But I know you mentioned something about making controls around the restrictions to the changes to the timesheets. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So I think that's one control that the manual timesheets have over an electronic timesheet from the get-go, is that once an employee submitted their timesheet, they can't make any more changes to it. It is what it is. It's been submitted to their supervisor. The supervisor has reviewed it, approved it, made any changes to reflect actual hours worked, and then submitted it to the payroll department. And so just the same has to be done for the electronic timesheets. And all of the providers that we're familiar with have this implemented, but it does need to be discussed at the time of implementation that, they set it up in different ways. You can set it up so that all the supervisors or managers have to approve the time before it's accessible by the HR manager, or it can't be processed by Ceridian or ADP if you're using their service until it's approved by the HR manager. So you can designate these people, and they have a certain login, and that's what pushes the payroll through.
Great.
So there's those features already inherent in these electronic timesheets and time cards. It's key to make sure that it is turned on when you're using those services.
That's true, because it's nice to have all these features, but if you're not actually enabling them, that it's not really, it's very limited, I guess, in its usefulness. So I guess they're an organization that has a lot of employees, is going to generate a lot of different types of outputs like payroll journals, pay stubs, and T4s. Have these gone electronic as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I think even if organizations are not using payroll service providers like ADP or Ceridian, but are doing payroll through their accounting software like QuickBooks or ACPAC, I think there's a tendency now to be paperless and to not print all these payroll documents that can become pretty lengthy. So a lot of payroll registers are being saved in PDF when they're using QuickBooks or ACPAC. ADP and Ceridian provide a lot of these payroll registers now in the form of PDF or just available when they sign on to their account online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's great, it's convenient, it saves the environment. But I think the key thing about any payroll system is that, you can check all the inputs, as we talked about with the timesheets, but it's also really important to check the output, just to make sure there was no override along the way. And I think sometimes when things are paperless, that control slips. So I think it's really important that if payroll registers are being saved in an electronic format now, that review process not be eliminated.
Right.
And, quite simply, the best way to review it or to evidence the review is if the payroll register is emailed to whoever is supposed to review it or saved on the network with a notification sent to the person saying, okay, here, check it out. And then that person just acknowledges the review by email, and that email is saved by the payroll or HR manager. I think that's pretty simple and meets the requirement and that double check.
That's a great point. And I think if you have a lot of these outputs already electronically, like done electronically, then maintaining the employee files is probably a lot easier because you're not having to worry about scanning, like dealing with hard copies and trying to get them in electronic format and then them not being complete, those files.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I still see some organizations that pay their employees via a manual check. Not many, but there are still a few. Why might they want to change their ways?
Yeah, so I think the thing is as Cassie said, there's a lot of time-saving opportunity in doing online or electronic payments. I think the number one thing is it increases accuracy and efficiency in that all banking services have worked with a lot of the accounting softwares now, and so you can download or export your payroll information from your accounting system and upload it or import it directly into the bank. So you're not reposting amounts payable to employees, and you're still following the controls of the bank. And also, I think the thing is, I think a lot of organizations that I'm familiar with, even if they're not doing manual checks, they've been doing payroll internally, and they have switched to EFT or direct payments,
right,
and they're doing it through their bank, but they have lost that control where, as Kathy was mentioning, they would require 2 signatures on each check, and now sometimes they only have the one person uploading the payroll and processing it.
Mm-hmm.
And, the thought basis is that it's a standard transaction and it happens every 2 weeks, pretty normal. But it's also, there's 2 signatures required for a $100 check, but you're doing a $200,000 payroll, and it's only one person that's allowed, and that one person might not even be a signing authority. So I think that's kind of the biggest control weakness I see when organizations are moving to these EFT or direct payments when they're doing payroll in-house.
Right.
And then if they're using service providers, the service providers are great. They do an automatic withdrawal, and they also withdraw all the remittance payments, so the CPP, EI, WFIB, and EHT, and they remit those to the required sources, so CRA or Ministry of Finance. And so having an online system or being with a payroll service provider is really great in that sense that it takes care of all those payments, all those remittances.
That sounds good to me. It sounds like everyone should be going this route then.
I think they all will be soon.
Yeah, I think so. So thank you, Virginia. Going paperless can seem like a daunting initiative, and I've seen it done really well, and at other times not so well. Kathy, can you tell us how some organizations can actually consider going paperless?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, there's about I'd say five areas that you know that, and you don't have to tackle all of them at once. I guess the first one is internal documents. That would be like contracts and agreements and paid invoices, things, whatever. And rather than keeping them in filing cabinets, you could store them in Google Docs. Number two, paperless bank statements and bill payments. We've already kind of talked about that.
Right.
And then there's the opportunity to share files with whoever, your service providers or shareholders or board members. So
your auditors.
Yeah, exactly. Dropbox or You Send It are ways of doing that, and it's very efficient also. Then there's also, the efficiencies of going paperless with meetings, and rather than having big printouts of agendas and all that and anything else relative, there's all sorts of the Doodle, SurveyMonkey, TeamViewer, When Is Good, and then there's a bunch of other ones. Mm-hmm. And then finally, rather than people still rely on scanning and faxing, but more and more there's opportunities to even make that paperless, so through things like TurboScan or eFax. So that's just sort of, I think, the five areas to sort of consider, and don't have to do it all at once. Can just sort of pick which areas to start with.
Yeah, those are great points. I think it's nice to outline it out that way so people can ease their way into that whole process of going paperless. It's not like you have to just flick a switch and you're one night, like the next day, you're instantly paperless. So thank you for providing some of those examples, Kathy. I've seen some clients use some of these examples that you've provided, like Doodle, when trying to coordinate the timing of an audit committee conference call. So, we had board members all over the place, and then including myself and then management, and then just trying to find a mutually agreed upon a time that works for everybody. I found that has been pretty useful. So I thought that was kind of neat.
I know it works very well.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, thank you, Kathy. I know that some people personally love their paper. Why should they consider even just going paperless?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's just lightens your load. There's less to push around, and it's so much more efficient. And it obviously clears the clutter from offices, which is an obvious one. And many of the solutions to going paperless are low cost or even free. Like a lot of those things that we mentioned just previously, don't even are free. So it's pretty low cost to do it. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it decreases your environmental footprint. And I also think in this day and age, it sends out a great PR message to say that you're conscious and wanting to move towards paperless, and and then also, I mean, things like you won't need filing cabinets. Maybe you used to have 20, now you just need one for some very basic stuff. So, it reduces your office space needs, and so obviously lowers costs.
For sure, it's definitely easier to keep a space tidy when you don't have to deal with so much paper. And honestly, Kathy, I've yet to see a great looking filing cabinet.
Exactly. I know.
Although paperless sounds great in theory, it's got to have some downsides. Am I right, Kathy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, it's, as you said, it's not easy. You have to have a strong implementation plan and a team lead to sort of depending on the size of your organization. And so it provides, you're required to have diligence and flexibility from all staff and board members just to get used to the new processes. I guess the other thing, you've got to make sure that technically, all your solutions, are integrate with each other, that you're not sort of putting apples and oranges together. And then there's obviously a time cost for training and implementation. So if you're going to do it, it's best to do it sort of during a time of the year that is less busy. And then obviously very, very key to determine proper, ways to store your, obviously if you're going with one of the Google Docs thing but I mean, making sure that everyone understands how to store things and where to store them. So otherwise it could lead to havoc if you need to access that. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before, challenging for non-tech savvy users. And then I guess the other thing too is, you make sure, you're now, putting client and customer data paperless. You got to make sure you safeguard it properly. And then finally, I mean, you want to make sure CRA has I mean, there's so many different variations on what CRA and other regulatory bodies require, but want to make sure that you save it properly and the length of time required for those regulatory bodies.
Yeah, for sure. We can't forget about our friends at CRA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. It seems like any big initiative like going paperless is proper planning is going to be the key for a successful transition. So you can't just rush through this type of process.
Yeah.
Great.
No, exactly. And it's very key to be diligent about it, and you don't need to do it all at once.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. So it seems like a major buzzword these days is cloud computing and being on the cloud. Besides storing a few documents in my iCloud account, I can't really say that I use it much personally. But Virginia, I was wondering if you could tell us quickly, I guess, or I don't want to rush you, but I want to make sure we have room for questions. Can you tell us how organizations might be able to benefit from using the cloud?
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about on the cloud, there's different ways you can be on the cloud. So I think the most common are data storage or sharing. So, using Google Drive, Dropbox, that type of stuff. And then also you can be on the cloud through a service provider. So ADP is on the cloud, and some of those other services that Kathy mentioned. So although you might not think you're on the cloud, if you're using ADP, you are. So it's just to be aware of there's different ways to do that. And
isn't there some accounting packages as well that are on the cloud, like QuickBooks and stuff like that? Where definitely. Yeah, there's QuickBooks and Xero, different accounting software.
A bunch of them, yeah.
Interesting. So why would an organization want to be on the cloud?
So I think part of being on the cloud is there's cost savings. If you're on the cloud, there's less. You don't require as much hardware in the form of servers, as much server space, etc. And also, there's flexibility in that you can reduce the amount of space that you have on a short term basis. Mm-hmm. So if you realize that you don't need as much space as you have, you can quickly downgrade your package with those service providers. I'm talking more about data storage than an accounting system.
Right.
There's also the disaster recovery. So, if something happened to your office space or your computers or your hardware, as long as you have internet access, you can walk down to the local Starbucks and you can pick right back up. And then, there is security. It can also be a pro and a con, but you can, especially when you're file sharing, you can restrict access to a user down to the document level. There's user controls in place on your accounting software packages, etc.
So if your information is out there on cyberspace, I'd imagine that there's got to be some things you need to worry about, or am I just being paranoid?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is, where is the data being stored? So as I said about the service provider, so ADP, so they're on the cloud. Where are they storing their data? A lot of these organizations or these companies are storing their data on U.S. servers. Mm-hmm. And so if your data is stored on a U.S. server, then you're subject to the U.S. Information and privacy rules. It might not be a concern if all you're doing is saving purchase invoices on there or policies and procedures of the organization. But if you're starting to save a lot of your, let's say you have members or donors and you're saving their information on there, then that might be a concern, since the U.S. does have certain rules that allow access to their information. Now, I'm not an expert on this. It's more of a legal or an IT issue, but I just wanted to bring it to the attention. That's one consideration. You also have to make sure that there is the same document retention policies so that you can meet CRA's needs, as Kathy mentioned. And then there are data security issues. People can take documents off the cloud. There's not as many restrictions that you can put on like you could with the network. They could be accessed on various personal devices. And if people are pulling the documents off the cloud, using them on a personal device and putting them back on the cloud, they could also be transferring viruses. Oof. So there can be some issues with being on the cloud. So I think the number one thing is that, again, the IT department gets involved whenever you're going to move your system, and it really needs to be policy-driven to ensure that it's a safe environment for the organization.
That's pretty scary stuff, Virginia. Thanks. I think the common theme today is not to throw away the securities or internal controls that you had in place before embracing some of these technological advances. You need to find a way to adapt them into your new environment. So, Daryl, I believe you had some questions for Kathy and Virginia, perhaps?
We did have some questions. So for those who haven't submitted their questions yet, but perhaps want to ask them and aren't quite sure how, perhaps you joined us a little bit late. Let me remind you how that goes. In your control panel, you have an option. It says questions. Whether it's a Windows or a Mac or a tablet or a phone, it always says questions. type in any question you have there. We will get it. We will make sure that Kathy and Virginia and Krista get it, and we can ask them, and then we can listen to them stammer and stumble a little bit as they rack their brains for the correct answer to advise you accordingly. Of course, you can also use social media. #WelshNPO. As long as that appears in your tweet, we'll get it, and we'll make sure we ask them. So that's what you need to know. Now, before we get to the questions, because you're all scrambling now to ask them, I know you are, I'm going to bring this slide up. I'm going to leave this slide here. You now have Krista and Kathy and Virginia's contact information. So if you're listening to this on demand, not live, and you want to ask a question, send them an email. It's that easy. Similarly, follow them on Twitter at Krista Casey, at Welsh Toronto, and listen continually to their wisdom and insights they share through the social medium. So we'll leave that there for you. Okay, we've got a variety of questions. And let me do a little housekeeping before I get to them. We are getting questions saying, will I get a copy of the slides? Can I get a recording of this? If you did join us late and you missed that, no problem. The answer is yes. In about a week's time, give or take, we will send you an email and you will have a link that you can listen to it on demand. Of course, you can go at any time to the welshllp.com website and go to the media library where all of our webinars are kept. And there is a vast repository of webinars, including several around NPO. So check that out. I encourage you. With that, let me go here. Questioning. Do you know if it's legally required to have a timesheet signed by employees if using a biometric scanner? Or is this simply an internal control issue? Ladies, who wants to tackle that one?
Okay, Virginia, I'll tackle it.
Brave soul.
To be honest, I don't know if it's legally required. I would assume not. However, I would say whether it's legally required or not, it is definitely a very strong control for the timesheets to be reviewed by someone, even if a biometric system is used, just to make sure that someone didn't just go hang out at 9 a.m., hit their finger, and come back around 4 p.m. Okay. But whether it's legally required or not, I can't address that.
Yeah, I think timesheets are optional. It's always a good practice, but the biometric part of, hopefully if it's a sound system, is even more secure than having somebody's signature, which could be forged, I guess.
That's true. Interesting.
Yeah.
Just a comment here from the audience. They were early on in the webinar, we're talking about the EFT process, the electronic funds transfer. And this individual was saying that they use and recommend TelPay, TELPAY, to their clients, as their workflow processes, in this person's opinion, are far more advanced than what the banks offer. So, for example, FOBs are not required. Rather, approvals are made via smartphone by multiple signing authorities, and tight integration is provided to popular accounting software. So there's another option that you may want to consider. There was a whole conversation about going paperless, and this individual is wanting to know, in our experience, how long does it typically take to go paperless?
I guess it depends on how fast you want to do it, and how much volume we have, and it really, I don't think there's a finite answer. I think it's really, and also, it might be worthwhile to get a consultant in or somebody that's had the experience to do it to help you plan it out properly and estimate time.
It's
just an anecdote. I read an article the other day on paperless, and one organization went 100% paperless, and they said their biggest challenge was submitting proposals that were always required in paper. And
right.
So they always found that that's the most challenging for other people to accept their paperless documents.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Canada is much behind Europe in those areas because Europe has been paperless for so long, and they don't even I think paper checks for them, they don't even have them. They say, what is that? So it's interesting. So we're finally catching up.
One of the questions we did get, and Kathy, I think you just indirectly answered it. The question was wondering if it's desirable to hire a consultant to steer the paperless conversion.
Yeah. I would say, again, it depends on how big your organization is and how much paper you have and what you're trying to do. So it might be worthwhile to at least get some initial guidance and then decide if you can do it on your own.
Paperless is definitely, you've got people's attention here. And another question on that topic. They're wondering if it's recommended or desirable to run parallel for a period of time when doing that paperless conversion. I'm assuming the answer would be yes, but I look to you ladies for your expertise.
Yeah, I definitely think so, like just to make sure that, the system is working, yeah, I mean, for instance, even like the whole mail, like, when mail comes in the door, and even with checks that are, going through the check scheme, well, this is obviously paperless. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile just until you become comfortable to audit it in ways or sample audit it for a few months.
Exactly. I think with paper documents, they're kind of permanent, right? They're physical documents, and when you say you scan them and you carry them all electronically, you don't necessarily want to destroy them right away until you've actually tested the integrity of the scanned documents, because then the original document is gone forever.
Yeah, but what I said earlier with the bank check scanners for banks, they just basically say once you scanned it and you've seen for confirmation, you can just throw it out. So because you're going to get an electronic copy of the check already.
Yeah, and I think a lot of banks, they require you to hold them on for a few days, but I think I don't recall the time period, but I think there's a time period where you have to destroy the check. I don't think you're allowed to hold on to them because of privacy issues and that kind of thing.
Right.
This is a good question. I love this one, Ashley, because I can relate to it on a personal nature. So, when implementing electronic fund transfers, are most payees already set up to receive online payments? Said another way, do we have to worry about payees not being able to accept an online payment?
I think, more and more, and then there are a lot of people there still are many that can't do it, but it's, over the past, say, 10 years, more and more we are finding that companies are able to accept them. But, so yeah, there's still, if you're setting up a new bank account, it's a good idea to still have a limited supply of checks on hand.
Yeah, I think you're not going to be able to destroy those right away.
Yeah.
That's where peer pressure comes in. What do you mean you're not set up on online
Mind
payments?
you, as I said, in Europe, they don't even know what a check is, seriously. So.
Well, when you think of it, it is pretty archaic. It's just it's a promise that, I promise that I've got the money in my bank account to pay for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, just a reminder. Again, if you haven't asked your question yet, you still have a few minutes. We're in our final, shall we say, 5 or 6 minute countdown to get through as many as we can. But, sneak them in. Go to your control panel and into the question section and type them there, and we'll do our best to ask our experts. Here's the question. Actually, I like this one too. It's interesting. What size of payroll is required to make online payment worthwhile?
Right. So I think actually the thing that's great is there are a ton of online payroll service providers now that are extremely affordable. So even if you only have 2 employees, it could be worth the while, especially when they permit the source deductions on your behalf. So that's one less deadline you have to meet and one less payment you have to file. I would say that we do have some clients, though, that have switched from a payroll service provider to doing it through their accounting software, and they do it a lot for funder reporting. So they allocate employees' time to various programs, and I found it a lot easier to do it in-house than through a payroll service provider. So I think it's not necessarily the size of the organization, but the needs or what you're looking for from the payroll.
Which of the accounting systems are, geared to that? I think with the Microsoft,
Great Plains is pretty strong.
Yeah.
But all of them, their payroll systems are pretty advanced and pretty adept. Yeah.
And that it's probably important, if you're going to use your software to generate your pay runs, then it's probably important to keep your updates, regularly updating your software so that you got the latest payroll changes, so you got the right remittances and that kind of stuff, because that changes often.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is it's really just over the past few years that CRA has actually enabled you to pay online. So if you're using your accounting software, you can simultaneously pay your remittances just to keep things current. Whereas in the past, they could, you'd have to send in a check again. So that's made, online, you're using your accounting software a bit more efficient.
I love the NPO community. As we're giving answers, we're getting additional contributions from the audience. Jen has shared that TelPay works with most common software. And Richard has shared that any firm or individual who has a bank account is able to accept EFT payments. So that's kind of fun to know. What else we got here? Timesheet approval and payroll register approval were both discussed, but are they both required?
Yeah, so as an auditor, yes. And the reason is generally the people doing the review is different people. So generally the timesheets are approved by a direct supervisor or manager that is actually knowledgeable of the employee's hours and schedule. And then the payroll register is generally reviewed by upper management, someone kind of above the payroll clerk or payroll processor, whether that's the director of finance or executive director, depending on the organization. But the review of the payroll register is also very important. You can do a quick check just to make sure that the gross pay is the same amount every pay period, and if it spikes, why. That the gross pay for all hourly employees is under a certain threshold. If it's really high, why? And it's just a good double check to make sure that there aren't fictitious employees on the payroll. People are being paid for the hours that they're working and at the right rates. So it's just a good double check. And as I said, for a lot of not-for-profits, payroll costs are generally the highest cost for the organization.
All right. So with that, we actually have a few questions we didn't get to. We apologize about that. Unfortunately, though, we do have the email information in front of you. So by all means, email us if we weren't able to answer it live today. We apologize. And again, if you're listening to this on demand, don't hesitate. Please email Kathy or Krista or Virginia. We'd love to hear from you and share our expertise. For more information about Welsh, you can always check us out at welshllp.com. And again, one final push for that media library. Some fantastic comment there with some great thought leaders. So if you liked this session today, well, we're doing it again real soon. So look forward to that invite in your inbox on another NPO Expert webinar series. With that, we are done. Krista, thanks for your help today.
Thank you, Daryl.
And Kathy, thank you so much for joining us from Toronto.
It was my pleasure.
And Virginia, you rocked it for our first webinar. Right on. Way to go.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done, folks. Again, we promised to get you in and get you out all within the hour. We're keeping our promise. We hope you have a fantastic day. We shall talk to you soon. Take care.